New role passives, HP buffs, projectile size buffs, a Pharah rework, a ranked rework. This Season 9 of Overwatch is the biggest patch the game has seen, so let's go over everything in detail with timestamps, and if there's any video to share with a friend on all the changes, it's this one. Let's begin. Role passives are changing. The tanks still have 30% knockback resistance and still have 30% less ultimate generated from both enemies and teammates damaging and healing the tank respectively, but they have a new global passive where they regenerate 20 HP per second after 5 seconds of not taking damage. The DPS heroes, the old reload speed bonus after an elimination has been completely removed and replaced with a healing reduction where dealing damage reduces healing received on the enemy by 20% for 2 seconds. They also benefit from the global healing passive that the tanks do, where they also regen 20 HP per second after 5 seconds of not taking damage. And for supports, their old healing regen passive is replaced with a better version of the global one, where it's the same 20 HP per second, but it's after 2.5 seconds of not taking damage. We'll clean up the graphic on screen, and this is what we're left with in Season 9. This is what you share with your friends. For the general hero updates, first the health pools are being changed. The total health pool for all heroes, including health, armor, and shields, are going to be increased from around 15 to 20%. All hero quick melee attacks damage is increased from 30 to 40, with the exception being Rein and Brig, who swing a hammer and have a different number when we'll go over the individual changes later on. Next, they're increasing the cost of all ultimates by 10%, so there's less frequency of ultimates in the game, especially with the larger health pools. And finally, there is a global projectile size increase. So most damage dealing projectile sizes have been increased, allowing all heroes to hit their targets more easily. It's a long list of bullet points, so bear with me. Hit scan weapons with a high spread and rate of fire, such as Soldier 76's pulse rifle, have been increased by 0.05. Travel time projectiles that are shotguns, such as Roadhog's scrap gun, or have a high rate of fire, such as Ramattra's Void Accelerator, have been increased by 0.05 as well. Average hit scan weapons and abilities, such as Cassidy's Peacemaker, have been increased by 0.08. Travel time projectiles that travel 50 meters per second or faster, such as Hanzo's Stormbow, are increased by 0.10, and travel time projectiles that travel slower than 50 meters per second, such as Pharah's rocket launcher, are increased by 0.15. The last rule they put here was that large projectiles with base sizes greater than 0.5 meters are excluded from this update. Based on my understanding, I believe this will include things like Orisa's Energy Javelin, Reinhardt's Fire Strike, Roadhog's Chain Hook, and Sigma's Accretion. Now let's go over each hero individually, which includes all the global changes, starting with D.Va. D.Va is getting plus 75 HP to her mech in the form of armor, which is better than other forms of HP, and in her pilot form she's getting plus 25 white health, putting her at 175 here. Her fusion cannon's projectile size should be increased by 0.05, and her light gun while in pilot form, the projectile size should be increased by 0.10. For her self-destruct, the patch notes say the outer radius max damage has been increased from 900 to 1000, but I swear the damage has always been 1000 up close, so apparently it was 900, I guess. The inner radius range is increased from 4 to 6 meters. That's just the scaling distance between the different levels of damage for the self-destruct. And finally, the cost of the self-destruct itself is going to be increased by 10%. For Doomfist, he gets 75 more HP, sitting at a flat 525 in roll Q. His hand cannons, his primary fire, the projectile size should be increased by 0.05. The rocket punch, the max impact damage is increased from 50 to 75, and the max wall slam damage will be increased from 30 to 40, so he does deal a little more DPS. And finally, his Meteor Strike ultimate, the cost is increased by 10% like everybody else. JunkerQueen is gaining 75 health. Her Jagged Blade is a slow projectile, so I believe the size should be increased by 0.15, so it'll be way easier to land. And her Rampage ultimate, the wound damage over time is increased from 60 to 90, and its cost will be increased by 10% as well. Unlike the other tanks, Mauga's health is going to go up by 100. The Incendiary and Volatile Chain Gun projectile size should be increased by 0.05, and his Cage Fight ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. For Orisa, it's her armor that's going to be increased by 75. That's right, armor health. Her primary fire projectile size will be increased by 0.05, and her Terra Surge ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. Ramattra is getting 75 health, and remember this will apply for both forms, like so. His Void Accelerator, while in the Omnic form, the projectile size will be increased by 0.05, and his Pummel, while in Nemesis form, will be increased by 0.05 as well. His Annihilation ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. Reinhardt is getting 75 HP increase, with 50 of it being health and 25 of it being armor. His Rocket Hammer swings, the damage will be increased from 85 to 100 a swing. His charge wall impact damage will be increased from 225 to 275, and his Earth Shatter ultimate cost is going to be increased by 10%. Roadhog is going to get 100 health. That's right, he's 800 health in roll Q. His Scrap Gun projectile size should be increased by 0.05 meters, and his Whole Hog ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. Sigma is going to get shield health increased by 75. His Hypersphere's primary fire projectile size will be increased by 0.15 meters, and his Gravitic Flux ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. Winston is also getting a 75 HP increase, but 25 of it will be health, and 50 of it will be armor. His Tesla Cannon primary fire is actually going to be increased from 60 to 75 damage per second, and his secondary fire alternate fire, the Sniper Monkey, that is a hit scan shot, so I think the projectile size should be increased by 0.08 meters. And his Primal Rage punch damage per smack is going to be increased from 40 to 50, but the cost will be increased by 10%. For Wrecking Ball, he's going to get a 75 armor HP increase. His Quad Cannon primary fire projectile size will be increased by 0.05 meters, and his Minefield ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. The last tank is Zarya. Her base white health only, not shield, will be increased by 75. Her Particle Cannon primary fire beam width will be increased from 0.15 to 0.2 meters, and her Grav will cost 10% more. Ashe, her health is going to be going up to 250. It's a plus 50 increase. The Viper, her weapon, the projectile size should be increased by 0.08 meters for both unscoped and scoped. The Dynamite is technically a slow traveling projectile, so I assume the projectile size will be increased by 0.15 meters, so it's way easier to pop. Bob's damage is going to be increased from 14 to 17 damage per bullet. That's really good. And the ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. An extra note is that Bob will apply the new DPS passive with the 20% healing reduction debuff. Just saying. Bastion's white health is going to be increased by 50. That's right, it's going to be a 350 HP DPS hero. In his Recon form, the projectile size should be increased by 0.05 meters. For the Assault form, the projectile size should be increased to 0.05 as well. His A36 Tactical Grenade is a pretty slow projectile, so it should be increased by 0.15 meters, and his ultimate configuration Artillery cost is increased by 10%. Cassidy's HP is also going up by 50. His Peacekeeper projectile size is going to be increased by 0.08 meters. For Deadeye, the initial damage rate will be increased from 130 to 150 in the early parts, and then the rate will increase from 260 to 300 later on. Deadeye is a little complicated, so here's a graph made by Cactus Puppy, shout out to him. This is where we will see the comparison between the old and the new. X-axis is the time it takes while you hold the ultimate, and the Y-axis is the damage over time. Simply put, the damage is a little bit better and is in line with all the HP buffs that everybody is receiving on this patch. And of course, the ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. Echo's health is going to be increased by 50. The Tri-Shot projectile size should be increased by 0.1 meters. The Focusing Beam width is going to be increased from 0.2 to 0.25 meters. And the Duplicate, the max health, including, health, armor, and shields, will be increased from 300 to 350 when you duplicate tanks. And the ultimate cost itself will be increased by 10%. Genji's health is going to be increased by 50. He's a 250 cyborg ninja now. His shurikens, both the primary and secondary fire, have projectile speeds of 60 meters per second, so that means they should both have a projectile size increase of 0.1 meters. The Dragon Blade is getting a buff where the swing recovery is decreased from 0.9 seconds to 0.7 seconds, so you can swing a lot more and add an extra swing at the end, and the cost is going to be increased by 10%. Hanzo's health is going to go up by 50, so he's a 250 HP Shimada brother as well. His Storm Bow projectile size does depend on how long he pulls the bow. because it does affect the projectile speed of it, but we're going to assume most people do a pretty much full charge shot. So we're going to say as a blanket statement that the projectile size should be increased by 0.1 meters. He's shooting some big logs now. The storm arrow damage should be increased from 65 to 75. The cooldown of it will be reduced from 10 to 8 seconds, and the projectile size of the storm arrows itself is also going to be increased by 0.1 meters. The Dragon Strike ultimate cost will be increased by 10% as well. For Junkrat, his health is increased by 50. For Junkrat's frag launcher, the projectile size is going to be reduced from 0.25 to 0.2 meters according to the patch notes, but remember, there is that global change and rule applied, so at the end of the day, it is going up to 0.35 meters because it does get a 0.15 meter increase. So an easier way to put it is the projectile size is increased from 0.25 to 0.35. That's the net change. His concussive mine is also a slow projectile, so I assume its size is also increased by 0.15 meters. And finally, his Riptire's ultimate cost is increased by 10%. Mei is going to get 50 HP, putting her at 300 HP. Her Endothermic Blaster alternate fire, aka her Icicle, the projectile size is going to be increased by 0.1 meters, and her Blizzard ultimate is going to be increased by 10%. Pharah is getting a rework this patch, bear with me, it's kind of long. Health is going to be increased by 50. The Hover Jet's passive now gives you better aerial maneuverability and control. The speed boost is also increased from 20% to 40%. But the difference now is that you no longer refill your fuel in the air. You will only refuel once you land on the ground. However, you can slow your descent without using any fuel. This will take some getting used to. Alright, her weapon, the rocket launcher, the self-damage percentage is going to be decreased from 50% to 25%, so you take less self-damage to incentivize you to actually rocket jump yourself without using any fuel. Recovery rate is going to be reduced from 0.85 to 0.8 seconds. That means you can shoot your rockets a lot quicker. Projectile speed will be increased from 35 to 40 meters per second, and the size of the projectiles will be increased by 0.15 meters. That's the global change, so these rockets are gonna hurt. Jet Dash is her brand new ability bound on the secondary fire button by default. It now gives you a horizontal boost in the direction you're moving. This will also be on an 8-second cooldown. Now for Jump Jets, it now gives you 50% of your fuel back and can briefly overfill the maximum amount. Now they are nerfing this ability a little bit. The vertical boost height will be reduced by 20% and the cooldown will be increased from 10 to 14 seconds. Now for Concussive Blast, it now deals 30 explosion damage and the cooldown is decreased from 9 to 7 seconds. There are some small nerfs though. The knockback distance is reduced by 10% and the range of it is going to be decreased from 8 to 6 meters. For Rocket Barrage or Ultimate, it now instantly refills the Hover Jet's fuel, and the cost will be increased by 10% like every other hero. And that's it for Pharah. Try her out, let me know what you think. Reaper's health is going up by 50, so he's going to sit at 300. His Hellfire Shotgun projectile size should be increased by 0.05 meters per pellet, and the Death Blossom ultimate cost is going to be increased by 10%. Sojourn's health is going up by 50. The Railgun is a projectile weapon, right? The primary fire, and it has a high rate of fire, so it's probably going to have a projectile size increase of 0.05 meters. Or the Railgun alternate fire, basically the hit scan secondary fire shot, that base projectile size has been reduced from 0.1 to 0.07 meters at 100% charge. That's what the patch notes say. But then you have to reapply that global modifier of 0.08 meters, and now we have a net increase from 0.07 meters to 0.15 meters, so it is still bigger at the end of the day. They probably just nerfed it a little bit as an individual tweak, so it's not as egregious. Overclock is, of course, increased by 10%. Soldier 76, HP is going up by 50. The Heavy Pulse Rifle primary fire size is going to go up by 0.05 meters. The Helix Rocket size is going to go up by 0.1 meters, and the Tactical Visor cost is going to be increased by 10%. Sombra, health increased by 50. Machine Pistol, projectile size increased by 0.05 because it is a high rate of fire. The Virus projectile size will be increased by 0.1, and the EMP cost will be increased by 10%. Symmetra, it's shield health that's going to be increased by 50. Not white health, shield health. That's better than normal. Her Photon Projector primary fire beam width is increased from 0.2 to 0.25 meters wide, and the Photon Projector secondary fire, that orb projectile, that size will be increased by 0.1 meters, and the Photon Barrier, the giant wall, the cost of it's going to be increased by 10%. And her sentry turret, this isn't actually a patch note, but I just want to remind people that these turrets, if they zap you, it will apply that new DPS passive with that 20% healing reduction debuff. For Torbjorn, he's going to get plus 50 white health. His rivet gun, the primary fire Cheeto gun, is what I like to call it. The projectile size is going to go up by 0.1 meters. And the shotgun alternate fire, this is a travel time shotgun, so the size will only be increased by 0.05 meters. And of course, the molten core ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. Now for deploy turret, this isn't a patch note as well, but I want to remind people that this will also apply that new DPS passive with the 20% healing reduction debuff, so be careful out there. Tracer is only going to get plus 25 health, putting her at 175. For pulse pistols, the projectile size will be increased by 0.05 meters, and the pulse bomb cost will be increased by 10%. Widowmaker is actually back at 200 health. She's going from 175 to 200. The Widow's Kiss, the SMG portion, the size of those is going to be increased by 0.05 meters, but you wouldn't really be using it anyways. The more important shot, the charge shot, that projectile size will be increased by 0.08 meters because it's a hit scan shot. And the Infrasight ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. Onto the supports, Ana's health is going to go up by 50. The Biotic Rifle Unscope Shot is a pretty fast projectile, so its size should be increased by 0.1 meters. The Scope Shot is a hit scan, so its size is going to be increased by 0.08 meters instead. The Biotic Grenade is a slower projectile, so it does get the maximum 0.15 meter increase in its size. Sleep Dart's projectile size is getting increased by 0.1 meters, and the Nano Boost ultimate cost is going to be increased by 10%. Baptiste's health is going up by 50. The Biotic Launcher, the primary fire DPS portion, it's a hit scan, so it's only going to 0.05 meters. Biotic Launcher's secondary fire, the healing projectile, is a 60 meters per second speed, so that means it's an increase of 0.1 meters in the projectile size thickness, and the Amplification Matrix ultimate cost is going to be increased by 10%. Brig's health is going to be increased by 50, the Rocket Flail swing damage is going to be increased from 35 to 45, and the Rally ultimate cost increased by 10%. Now onto Illari, health is going to be increased by 50. The Solar Rifle projectile size is going to be increased by 0.08 meters because it's a medium-paced hit scan shot. Now one thing I want to point out here is that the patch from around October 31st, 2023 said that her primary fire projectile size was reduced from 0.1 to 0.05 meters on that patch. And now that means with this projectile size buff for everybody, it's going to be at a 0.13 meter thickness, which is 30% better than it was at hero launch, and that's how impactful projectile sizes can feel in this game. Captive Sun's ultimate cost is going to be increased by 10%. For Kiriko, her health is going to be increased by 50, and the kunai projectile size is going to be increased from 0.18 meters to 0.25 meters, a net of 0.07 meters. That's the final. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because on these patch notes itself, if you just read it, base projectile size reduced from 0.18 meters to 0.15 meters. But we have that global projectile size change, and you have to go into the wiki, figure it out, and then add that back on top of it. So I just did the, shorthand version for you. All you need to know is that it is 0.07 meters thicker. It is 0.25 meters for that projectile kunai. Okay. And Kitsune Rush's ultimate cost is going to be increased by 10%. For Lifeweaver, his health is going to be increased by 50, putting him at 275. Thorn Volley, the projectile size, should be increased by 0.1 meters, and the Tree of Life ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. Lucio's health is going to get increased by 50. The Sonic Amplifier, these giant green Oreos are going to go up by 0.1 meters. The Sound Wave, the boop portion, the damage is going to be increased from 25 to 35. The knockback distance is going to be increased by 12%. And the movement lockout duration is going to be increased from 0.3 to 0.45 seconds. So the enemy is going to be CC'd just a little bit longer. Sound Barrier's ultimate cost is going to be increased by 10%. Mercy's health is going to go up by 50. The Caduceus Blaster, if you're a Battle Mercy, these things already have a giant hitbox, and they're going to be even bigger now at a 0.1 meter size increase. For Guardian Angel, the active duration on Jump and Crouch's bonus movement cancellation is reduced from 1.5 to 1 second. In translation, this is basically a buff if you decide to super jump, as there's a lower cooldown. The Sympathetic Recovery, the health recovered from healing output, is going to be increased from 25% to 40%, so you do heal more when you're pocketing somebody. And Valkyrie's ultimate cost will be increased by 10%. Moira's health is going to go up by plus 50. Biotic Grasp, the secondary fire damage is going to be increased from 50 to 65 damage per second, and the secondary fire target acquisition radius is going to be increased from 0.6 meters to 0.7 meters. It's going to be way more forgiving. Coalescence ultimate cost is going to go up by 10%. And finally for Zenyatta, he's getting a 50 HP increase, 25 of it is white health, and 25 of it is shield health. Zen's melee is a little unique because it's 50% of the base melee damage, and base melee got buffed to 40 damage, so that means Snap Kick does 60 damage. Yeah. The Orbs of Destruction, both the primary and secondary fire volley, the size of it will be increased by 0.1 meters, and his Transcendence ultimate cost is going to be increased by 10%. That is it for the hero balance. We have a few more things to cover, and what you're looking at is Junkertown at nighttime. Yeah, there's a nice little update for this map here. There's a brand new building near this first checkpoint to provide more cover and block long sight lines, especially for Widowmaker. They've added a water tower here near this first point as well to block sight lines from this upper little hole from Widow players. It's always the Widow players. They've added a lot of vehicles near the cliff to provide additional cover and again block long sight lines. They've reduced the cliffside path here to kind of tighten the space and reduce the overall footprint of this whole area and map. They've removed the small health pack here on the second area balcony that was easy for defenders to overuse. They've added this vertical beam at the beginning of third point here to promote movement out of the upper floors and make this choke easier to defend. And they finally widened and added cover in this hallway near the end of third point here to make close quarter fights easier to maneuver. Now onto competitive or ranked changes. Let's start with matchmaking rating, aka your MMR. A lot of people hear this term. There is going to be a reset, a medium sort of reset. So at the start of this season, only the internal matchmaking ratings for all players have been adjusted to push players closer to the normalized average, which is approximately Gold 3. All matchmaking ratings for everyone has been decayed. The higher your rank, the more it has been decayed. That means most players will start at a lower skill rank and division than their most recent rank. Because now you have to do 10 placement matches. Placements have been rebuilt from the ground up. Your predicted rank, right here in the middle, will be displayed after each placement match. You must complete 10 matches in the role to receive your skill rank for that role, and winning your placements will have a significant impact on your final rank. Then every game of ranked you play will show you exactly how much you progress or decrease in your rank, and it'll show rank modifiers at the bottom of your progress bar to give you full transparency whether you're streaking, you're favored to win, or you weren't favored to win. Here's an entire reference sheet that Blizzard has provided here. And then if you're a cracked gamer, you can become the new champion, a skill tier above Grandmaster, very exclusive and much harder to attain. But of course, ranked is always a bit more fun with friends, but there are new grouping requirements in Season 9. Bronze to Diamond players may group with other players within 2 skill tiers of their own skill rank. So if you're Silver 3, you can queue up to Platinum 3. Master players may only group with players within 1 skill tier of their own skill rank, so Masters can queue with Diamond. Grandmaster players may only group with other players within 3 skill divisions of their own skill rank. So if you're a GM2, you can queue with GM5, but note they said other players. That means you're allowed to 5-stack in GM again. But champion players, that brand new exclusive rank, may only group with 1 other player, so duos only within 3 skill divisions of their own skill rank. So that is why it is a much more exclusive group. The last thing we have is competitive rewards. Jade weapon variants are now introduced. Each Jade weapon variant does cost 3,000 competitive points to purchase, but you have to earn them again because all players will start the season with a balance of 0 comp points. All your existing comp points have been converted into a new currency, which is the legacy competitive points. And now the old golden weapons are only available with 3,000 legacy competitive points. So they're technically vaulted for legacy players who just have a bunch of legacy points banked. But at the end of this year, any remaining balance of the active competitive points turns into legacy points. Jade weapons will cost 3,000 competitive points. In order to earn them, each win now grants 10 points, draws grant you 5 points, and if you lose, you get 0. Now that's what the patch notes say, but breaking news, a few hours before the season dropped, Aaron Keller, the game director, did tweet out that you will be able to buy golden guns after Season 9 thanks to all the community feedback and backlash, including myself. I think we all agreed that it wasn't going to be a good change if you're locked out of golden guns for a year, so thank you. And it looks like that is all. Thanks for watching, and come to my stream at twitch.tv/carq. Bye bye.